Hi, thanks for viewing my presentation on virtual formative assessment. I'm Dan Hickey. I'm a professor with the Learning Sciences program at Indiana University. This work is being carried out in collaboration with the fully online Indiana University High School. Uh, this is a recording that was formally presented at the Indiana eLearning Laboratory Workshop on April 12, 2022. I want to acknowledge the generous support of the Governor's Office of Indiana, Eric Holcomb, from the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, and the leadership of Charity Flores, the Chief Academic Officer of the Indiana Department of Education. Significant funds from the CARES Act came to IU to the Michael Beam's office. He's the Assistant VP for School Partnerships. Huge shout out to current and former graduate students at the Indiana University Learning Sciences program. In particular, Rebecca Ito, a PhD graduate of our program, who is currently the principal of Indiana University High School. Grant Chartrand and Trip Harris both developed the online courses I'll be talking about today, and Morgan Lau helped with those. So this is a series of 3 workshops. This is the second of 3 workshops. You can access those other 2 at the landing page that I'll talk about. Each workshop corresponds with a module in a course called Responsive Engagement and Virtual Learner Assessment, or REVLA. The one is in Canvas. At IU Expand, you will need an IU guest login for that one. One is in Google Classroom. You will need a personal Google account to log into that. You cannot log into that with your school account. These will generate 8 Indiana professional growth points. They all use the same format with this learn experience. We'll give you a little version of it, but they're really carefully designed so that you experience activities and assessments before you develop them yourself. And there you can see is the link to the landing page for this workshop that has links to those courses. It's bit.ly/IDOE workshop. Today's agenda, we're going to just navigate to this link. I'll show you what's there. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to virtual formative assessment. You're going to learn about informal reflections, which serve as a summative assessment of engagement and a formative assessment of understanding. I'll explain more about that. Then you're going to learn about the interactions and quiz types and learn about making what we call semi-formal formative self-assessments in Canvas and in Google Forms. There is the landing page there. You can see there's those 3 articles. I'll talk about those at the end, and there's a bunch of other links for you to access there. So why formative assessment? Well, there's really broad consensus among learning experts about the value of formative assessment. It was introduced, an important paper by Roy Sadler in 1989. It was really popularized by Black and Willem in a report in 1998. And the National Research Council, they put together these reports where they bring together a bunch of experts and create a consensus around pressing topics. In this case, knowing what students know is one of those reports, and it wrote extensively about the importance of formative assessment. I believe that formative assessment is particularly important in online learning. Students need help knowing which concepts are most important. They don't have the advantage of often in an asynchronous class anyways, they may not have the advantage of teachers emphasizing which things they really want to focus on. And you really need to know, what do students need to know what they know, but you really want to make sure that they've mastered the key concepts. And in particular, if you do good online assignments where students are really engaging with resources and engaging with each other, well, they're engaging in discourse. Well, you want to make sure that that discourse leaves behind sort of what we call cognitive residue of concepts and facts that are important. Now, I'm going to introduce you to something called formative self-assessment. Um, Now, traditional formative assessment, it is effective, but it's really laborious, right? The pedagogical content knowledge needed to provide formative feedback, it's expensive, right? Teachers' time is precious. And in particular, when you're doing private instructor-student interaction, that takes up a lot of time. And that time has to come from somewhere. And it often comes at the expense of more efficient public instructor-student interaction. Feedback sometimes isn't useful or usable. But it's also an issue that if you're not careful, learning can really be bounded too closely to assessments. And here's the real issue: is that to Randy Bennett wrote in this paper. He called formative assessment the educational equivalent of an urban legend, and that's because the important thing is that withholding formative feedback, it's a kind of malpractice, really. So just showing that students who get more feedback learn more than students who get little feedback or no feedback, that's not really a groundbreaking finding. That's just a test of educational malpractice. The important point is that formative assessment needs to be as effective as what it replaces, right? And you have to think about the whole ecosystem. If teachers and students just are spending all of their time learning to solve problems on a particular formative assessment, well, they're not learning much else beyond what's on that formative assessment. So formative assessments should come after assignments and make sure that students take away, again, that they leave behind the facts and the concepts and stuff that are important and that are going to appear on a summative assessment. And the real issue in my research is that everything is harder online because technological pedagogical content knowledge is particularly costly. As I'll show you, the learning management systems offer you a bewildering array of possibilities of item formats and exam formats. And that's a lot to learn on top of knowing how knowledge in a domain develops and actually knowing the knowledge of that domain. So throughout my work, I focus on what I've called multi-level assessment, and that's where there's 3 or more levels of increasingly formal assessment. We showed in workshop 1 how you can give very informal instructor feedback in the public on students' annotations and their artifacts. In this workshop, we're going to learn about a slightly more formal but still very informal activity-oriented reflections, and then a semi-formal curriculum-oriented formative assessment. So notice the informal reflections are associated with activities and assignments, whereas the semi-formal self-assessments, they're associated with the curriculum. And that's all aligned to a very formal achievement test that's actually aligned to external standards independent of the course. And that's what will be covered in the 3rd workshop. So you're really aligning learning across levels. And this allows you to sort of guarantee high performance on final exams, but without ever teaching to the test. As you go across these levels, the time scale of learning gets longer and longer, and the representation of knowledge is changed across levels so that you're never really teaching to the test at the next level. So the examples I'm going to give you today do draw from these 2 REVLA courses. There's the Canvas course on the right and the Google Classroom course on the left. So the first thing we'll talk about today are these informal assessments of engagement using reflections. So the point here is that I encourage teachers to try to avoid grading student artifacts when possible. Sometimes you really have to, but other times it can be really, really tedious to make judgments about what students know based on what they did. That's what summative assessments are for. You want to encourage students to be open and honest and engage and not constantly be asking, what you want, did they do it right and stuff like that. So drawing on Melissa Grisolfi's work on consequential engagement, we focus on reflection prompts that ask students about the intersection of their assignment with their personal goals and experiences. How did your experiences prepare you for this assignment? In some cases, you can say how suitable was your problem that you came up with for learning these things, and how will you use this knowledge in the future? Those are very personalized. Students can't cut and paste each other's reflections, and they're very difficult to answer those questions without having actually completed the assignment. So what's important about these is that these serve as a summative function of students' prior engagement, right? So if students in my classes, and I encourage you to consider this, if students produce a coherent reflection that clearly shows they engage and they completed all of the required parts of the assignment, they get all their points. And as I mentioned in the last workshop that got a lot of attention, I take 5 minutes a week to grade in my classes. I literally just cut and paste the exact same feedback in the grade book. See my comments, great job. Um, the only time I take away points from students is if they don't complete a part of the assignment, right? So again, to reiterate, I'm trying to avoid looking at student work for evidence of knowledge. Rather, I'm looking at it for evidence of engagement. Now, because of this, because you're asking them to reflect on the ideas they were working on, these are actually formative assessments of their understanding, right? So this draws from a situative perspective that allows you to assign the same assessment different functions. And that's why these are so fast, because you're really just looking to make sure that they've completed them. What's really important, so here's the reflection at the end of the assignments in the REVLA course. So students are instructed to submit their assignment, and when they submit, they're encouraged to reflect on the following. The first one of these suggestions, if you don't think about this, if you don't know to do this, this is a really good idea to ask your students, is there anything confusing? Do you have any suggestions? A really great way to improve your courses to go in and look at that feedback. You want to ask them, which paragraph was sort of least familiar, right? That's getting them again to reflect on the things. They have to go back and look over the assignment again and to think about what they struggled with. Collaborative engagement. What did you learn from looking at the work of your classmates? What might they have learned from you? Finally, cultural engagement. And so this allows me to make a really important point about an anthropological idea called prolepsis. And prolepsis refers to the way that anticipation of the future shapes the present. Now, my assignments in this class actually don't have very much about being culturally sustaining, but by asking students to reflect on it, they're going to think about it when they're engaging in the future. So for all of these things, when you have it in your head after the first reflection that you're going to have to reflect on these things, that causes you to engage in the way you want them to. So this has been shown to be an extremely powerful way of shaping students' engagement in productive ways. Here's a different reflection prompt. This is from one of my own classes, actually. So the contextual engagement, for example, in my educational assessment class, each student has to generate their own instructional goal to develop sample assessments for. So in that case, it says, well, how suited was your instructional goal for working through this assignment? When we're doing portfolio assessments, well, the math teachers go like, not very good because it's really hard. So the math teacher who learned that it's really hard to do portfolio assessment in their math class learned something really important about portfolio assessment. Collaborative engagement, again, whose comments were helpful? That math teacher might say, boy, I sure did learn a lot from those English teachers who were really able to put in place every one of the guidelines in the textbook for improving their existing portfolio assessments. Consequential engagement, what will you do differently in the future from what you learned? Conceptual engagement, this is an important one. I have these self-assessments I'll be talking about next. Even though this comes earlier in the levels of formality of assessments, it actually precedes in time, or comes, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. It comes after they've actually completed the formal self-assessment I'll be talking about next. So moving on, semi-formal, right? So the previous one was informal. This is semi-formal, right? So we're moving away from engagement and we're moving into understanding, right? Self-assessments are admittedly not as effective as uh, instructor-provided formative feedback. But instructor-provided formative feedback is so laborious, I want to encourage you to try to do self-assessments first. If you do them right, you can save a lot of time and free up that time for more efficient interaction. It's really important for the alignment of your assessments to be obvious to the learners, right? So it should be, right? So a learner who has engaged fully in the assignment should essentially be rewarded by being able to write a pretty good answer to an open-ended assessment. And a learner who hasn't engaged should be alerted that they really rushed because they didn't know they couldn't write anything in response. Now, it's important that the knowledge in in these semi-formal assessments, it should be represented more formally, right? It should be more focused on a specific concept, right? The big ideas, the big important things, and it should be framed not quite in a correct or incorrect way, but it should be more explicit. But it also should not ask the exact same questions that appear on your multiple choice exams, your summative exams, right? These are going to be open-ended assessments, but you also want to make sure that your exams are showing what we call transfer. In other words, that you don't want a student to learn or to set it up so that students go, oh, I'm just going to skip the assignments and do the self-assessments and then do the exam to earn my credential. The instructions should be really carefully worded to support formative functions. I'll show you what I mean. The items should go beyond correct answer to include more challenging best answer items. It's important that you not be able to look up the answers directly in Google. It's okay if students have to search for educational resources or search the assignment. That's precisely the point, to answer the question. What you don't want is for the actual answer to the item to appear directly in Google, to be cut and pasted without learning anything. The feedback that you provide should go beyond the correct answer. So here's a really important point. If you take away anything from this presentation, it's that if you do this right, if the students follow the instructions I'm about to show you, you have the students almost perfectly positioned to learn really important nuances about this specific important thing in your course. This is a lot of work to really get it right. You will learn how to do it as you go, as you practice it. And you may want to see what students write and compare that, or even talk to students and see how they do it. But this will really take full advantage of your knowledge of the different item formats and quiz formats in your learning management system, your knowledge of how understanding your discipline expands, and knowledge of the discipline itself. So the huge advantage of learning management systems are that they can automate formative assessments. In particular, you can require students to submit a response before showing them a comprehensive answer. In this case, we'll be showing you using Canvas and Google Forms within Google Classroom. The issue is that Canvas has 10 item formats and 4 quiz types. That is 40 different combinations. Google has 11 items and 2 quizzes for 22. And these work differently for formative versus summative assessment. So that's what we're going to focus on today. I'm going to show you the most straightforward examples. This is really important because the interaction with item format and quiz type, they impact how responses are collected and scored and how feedback is provided. So in Canvas, you've got ungraded surveys and you've got practice quizzes. I'll show you those today. Ungraded surveys are best for short answer or essay items, whereas practice quizzes are best for selected response and fill in the blank items that can be automatically scored. Canvas has a lot of item types. Like I said, 11, and I'm going to show you the 3 most common today. So here are the formative assessment instructions in the REVLA course. And right, so I want you to pay careful attention to these. These instructions really matter a lot. First, most participants should be able to write a response to each question. You're telling them that this is a sort of an assessment of how well they engaged. Now, really crucial, regardless, or even if your response is correct, or if you're not sure, you're encouraged to return to the assignment. So you want students to go back and try and write the most complete answer that they can, or they can search the web. But then they're encouraged to submit and then carefully compare their answer with the answer provided. This is what I mean by being a good opportunity to prevent very nuanced additional information. I'll show you what I mean later. But you want to let people know that this is an opportunity for them to be sure that they're prepared for the final exam. So now I'm just going to run through a bunch of examples and show you what this looks like. When you're using an ungraded survey and a true-false item, there you can see what I mean by giving a long sort of deal. That's a very straightforward item. That's actually not a very good item, frankly. It's a very factual true false, but I just want to show you how these all work. You can still, though, give the student this very detailed feedback here that explains quite a bit more. Conversely, here's a multiple choice item. Now again, this is the ungraded survey. So in an ungraded survey, you can only give one piece of feedback. It's the same regardless of their response. And so the student actually has to go in and compare their answer with the correct one. So they have to make the judgment, and that's why that's an ungraded survey. That's why this isn't ideal for selected response or short answer items. Here's the fill in the blank. Now I wanted to show you something important here. When you make fill in the blank items, you list all of the possible answers. And you can see here that I misspelled the word summative. And now, again, the learner's going to have to figure this out. With younger learners, this might be kind of confusing. You're going to have to be careful with this. And this, as I'll show you, works very differently, somewhat differently, in Google Forms. Now, here I want you to see what I mean when I talk about adding additional information. I say that as you learn more about assessment, you should come to appreciate that the distinction between formative and summative assessment is not as clear-cut as it might seem. So I'm elaborating on some really important points here that are central to my scholarship, that a formative assessment can also function as a summative assessment and vice versa. So you can add a lot of good stuff if you've done it right and your learners are reasonably motivated, and if you convince them that some of that additional information might appear perhaps as bonus questions on a final exam, you can really get them to engage very efficiently because they've been studying, they've been thinking about it, they hopefully learned something in the assignment, they learned more when they were searching to get a good answer. So you can really accomplish a lot with these assessments if they're well constructed. So this is an example with a short answer item. Now in Canvas, short answer and essay items use the exact same item type. The key difference is that Canvas can't grade these formats. It can't look at the responses or it can't look at the selection. So it isn't judging whether or not it's correct. And so that's why the ungraded survey, again, is better for your selected response and your short and your fill in the blank items, which can be automatically scored. It's your practice quizzes that are better for your short answer and essay items. And here you can see it's up to the student to compare their response with the with what you provide. Then here's an essay item. Again, it's the same format. The student is going to have to look at what they responded to and compare it to the response. Now, shifting gears to the practice quiz. So the important thing about the practice quiz, it does not put a grade in the grade book. Right, so that's why you want to use practice quiz. If you generate a graded quiz, it will put grades in the grade book. Now, you might want to do that for a formative assessment, but just be aware. But here you see that it's actually going in and evaluating the student's response, and you can also give different feedback depending on the response the student gives. Here you see with the multiple choice items. So this is an example. Now these are a little more work to create because you actually have to give the response that you give for whatever students post. So for instance, if I had selected an incorrect response, it would say incorrect and it would explain why that was incorrect. Here you see the fill in the blank. I've made the same mistake. Again, it's functioning pretty much the same way as before, but you can see that it's actually showing that it's correct, right? So before, it was up to the student to compare the spelling in their response with the spelling of the correct response. But in this case, they actually see that it wasn't one of the ones that you put in as being correct. Now remember, when you do the fill in the blank, you have to give all possible capitalizations, all possible answers. You might want to even put in misspellings if you think that's important. Again, the short answer item is different. Now, you can see why this format, why the practice quiz is really not ideal for the unscored short answer items, because you might want to, if you as an instructor want to go in and evaluate their responses, you can do that. But right, because it's an open-ended response, it's impossible to anticipate their answers. So there you see, again, the student is comparing their response with uh, with the explanation. And again, the explanation goes well beyond what the correct answer is. So that really wraps up the presentation. I think those are the most important things that you need to know. This last slide is showing you really the most important difference if you are in Google Classrooms and Forms. Everything else functions pretty much the same way in Forms, in a quiz. This is not a survey. You probably don't want to use the Google Forms survey for your formative assessments. You want to stick with the Google Forms quiz format. I just want you to know that when you do the fill in the blank, the only difference is that it actually shows all of those possible responses. Now again, Forms is able to do the comparison, right, and to tell you whether you got it correct. But regardless of what you do, it still shows you all of the possibilities along with the feedback. So with that, we're wrapping up this second of our 3 workshops. If you want to get started yourself, I strongly encourage you to take one of the REVLA courses. Again, the landing page, you can see it there. It's bit.ly/IDOE. That's bit.ly/IDOE workshop. We'll take you to that page, and there you can see the links. The Google Classroom site is that will require your personal Google account. You cannot get into that classroom with a school Google Workspace account. The REVLA course at IU Expand does require an IU login or an IU guest login. There's the link to get the guest login. It's quite simple to get. There's the link for creating the guest login. If you have questions, don't hesitate to email me at dthickey@indiana.edu. As I hope you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about these ideas, and I'm really excited about helping educators learn how to do this better. I'm also interested in helping other scholars think about this in different ways. And to that end, there's 3 papers that are linked there. I encourage you to start with the Hickey, Duncan et al. That was written with the teachers who I've been collaborating with for years, and Rebecca Ito at Indiana University High School. It was written for educators. It has basically no theory in it. It's very introductory. The Hickey, Chartrain, and Andrews paper was written for instructional designers, presumably who are grounded in more cognitive learning theories, and we show how our situative design principles were translated into discrete steps. And the Hickey and Harris 2021 was really written for the assessment community, but it does have 10 assessment design principles that are really the thinking behind what I'm sharing with you here today. I want to encourage you to search the web for free resources as well as paid resources. Teachers Pay Teachers has some very good formative assessments. More and more, they're suitable for online. You can search the web for items. If you say quiz, formative assessment, and for instance, a standard that you're working against, especially if you're using national standards, you will find good stuff. But you need to remember that if you can find the item and the answers on the web, your students can too. So you may find it necessary to rewrite items so that the answer does not appear directly. The worst thing is if Google provides the answer in the Google search window without even requiring students to click on the link. Right? You really want students. It's okay if students can search for resources to learn about to answer the item, but you don't want them to get the actual answer to the item. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and I hope that you can take advantage of this. And again, don't hesitate to email me, dthickey@indiana.edu.